Okay, let's unpack this. We're initiating a conversation into a really powerful and intensely honest piece of Scripture,
Hmm.
Psalm 44.
Hmm.
This text, it's not a gentle prayer of peace. It's more like a theological earthquake.
It really is. It captures this profound, almost agonizing tension between, a perfect memory of God's power and
Hmm.
the devastating reality of what's happening right now.
Right, this current despair. It's
Yeah.
a national lament that just throws all our easy assumptions about faith and
Mhm.
suffering into sharp relief.
It forces you to confront that great paradox of faith, doesn't it? How do you reconcile God's past faithfulness, which you hold as absolute truth, with your present circumstances, which are just screaming the
Yeah.
opposite? And our mission today, really guided by the foundational analysis from the You Need Faith in Jesus team, is to structurally dissect this internal conflict.
That shift.
That sharp shift from this unshakable historical confidence to this overwhelming present calamity, and then ultimately discover the true basis for redemption, which, spoiler alert, isn't found in human merit.
And that structural breakdown you mentioned is so essential here because Psalm 44, it's not really linear.
No.
It's an argument. It's an argument being presented to God. We are definitely utilizing the profound insights of the You Need Faith in Jesus team's deep study, which meticulously guides us, verse by verse through this architecture.
We have to. You have to understand the initial setup before the whole thing kind of collapses.
Precisely. The tension is the whole story. How can a people who perfectly articulate their historical identity, a nation delivered by supernatural means, face total defeat, humiliation, and exile, all while claiming to be faithful?
It's the struggle, isn't it, between that historical certainty and the damning evidence of circumstantial reality. We have to start where they start.
It's a perfect collective memory.
Exactly. So let's begin where the psalmist intentionally sets the stage. With that unshakable memory, that foundation built not on today's fleeting feelings or circumstances, but on the reliable, documented testimony of the past.
Okay, so section 1, the foundation of faith. This is all about remembering the works of old.
And the analysis from the You Need Faith in Jesus team puts tremendous emphasis on this first verse. It argues that true, lasting faith, it has to be fundamentally built upon received history, not just, some ephemeral, personalized experience.
And the psalmist articulates this flawlessly right in the opening lines. So here is Psalm 44, verse 1, from the King James Version. We have heard with our ears, O God. Our fathers have told us what work thou didst in their days in the times of old.
This is such a vital opening statement. We really need to slow down and appreciate what's happening here.
Okay.
The writer isn't saying, I personally saw God perform a miracle last Tuesday. He's saying, we possess a trustworthy generational record of God's mighty acts.
So their faith is built on a factual historical precedent.
Established by their ancestors, this record, this received history, is the starting point of their whole relationship with the divine.
I find that so profound because it kind of inoculates their faith against their present circumstance. Well, if my faith relied only on what I experience today, and today I'm in despair like they will be soon, the faith would just vanish.
Right.
But because it's anchored in what God did for their fathers, the memory stays constant, even when the current situation is just chaos.
That's the intellectual anchor. And the sources highlight that this transmission of history, it isn't accidental, it was commanded. God built a continuity mechanism right into the covenant.
The history wasn't meant to fade into myth.
Not at all. It was meant to be actively recounted and taught, making sure every generation had access to these foundational facts.
And we have to look at this specific mandate that cements this point. It's found in the Passover instructions. God commanded them to make the celebration instructional, turning a ritual into a history lesson.
To really grasp the depth of this mandate, we have to turn to Exodus chapter 12, verses 26 and 27. It speaks directly to the obligation of the parent.
It says, And it shall come to pass, when your children shall say unto you, What mean ye by this service? That ye shall say, It is the sacrifice of the Lord's Passover, who passed over the houses of the children of Israel in Egypt, when he smote the Egyptians and delivered our houses.
The beauty of that passage is that the question from the children is anticipated.
Yeah.
God doesn't leave the parents unprepared. The required answer is a recitation focused entirely on God's action. The smiting of the Egyptians and the deliverance of Israel. It's a complete removal of human agency from the story.
Absolutely. The ritual becomes a mnemonic device for theological truth. This passage transforms a historical event, the Exodus, into the eternal, reliable foundation for their covenant relationship. And the analysis provided by the You Need Faith in Jesus team is very clear on its practical application for us today. We are called not only to cherish the Word of God as our primary historical record, but also to actively share personal testimonies.
And this dual practice builds that collective belief in a God who consistently acts in history.
So verse 1 establishes the principle. God acts. But what specific history are they remembering here in Psalm 44? They narrow the focus pretty quickly.
They do. They move to the conquest of the Promised Land. They're recalling a moment of peak national achievement, the acquisition of the land they now dwell in.
This wasn't abstract. It was a tangible, miraculous land acquisition.
It's evidenced right there in verse 2. How thou didst drive out the heathen with thy hand and plantedst them, how thou didst afflict the people and cast them out. The remembrances of, you could almost say, divine colonialism, but attributed entirely to divine force.
And the essential, non-negotiable point of theology they hammer home is the denial of self-achieved military victory. They are making sure that no one, past or present, can take credit for this foundational success.
This denial is critical. The victory was God's alone, showing that their initial establishment as a nation was an act of pure grace. Let's look at Psalm 44, verse 3, fully, because this is an explicit theological statement.
Okay, let's hear it.
For they got not the land in possession by their own sword, neither did their own arm save them. But thy right hand and thine arm and the light of thy countenance, because thou hadst a favor unto them.
That is so emphatic. They list the instruments of war, sword, arm, and then they just negate their effectiveness completely. The true power sources are God's right hand and thine arm, which signify this active prevailing strength. But what about that phrase, the light of thy countenance? That sounds almost mystical. What does that specifically add to the physical description of victory?
That phrase, which in Hebrew translates to the concept of God literally turning his face towards them, it signifies divine approval and manifest favor. It links the physical victory, the conquest, to the spiritual disposition of God towards his people. It wasn't just raw, brute strength God provided. It was his active, benevolent presence that secured the land.
So they won simply because God had a favor unto them.
A direct gift of grace, unearned and undeserved.
So the victory isn't just the result of an intervention. It's the result of his disposition. It was a supernatural provision, granted simply because he chose to look upon them favorably.
Right. It elevates the discussion from military history to profound theology.
Yeah, it does.
And this emphasis on the source of success is a deep-seated warning against human pride, which is, a consistent theme throughout Scripture. The sources compel us to look at the foundational law, given just as they were about to enter the land, which anticipates this exact failure of taking credit.
That's the genius of the law. It warns against the temptation that hasn't even happened yet. We're warned in Deuteronomy 8, verses 17 and 18, about forgetting the true source of prosperity. Let's quote the KJV text fully on that.
Please.
And thou say in thine heart, my power and the might of mine hand have gotten me this wealth, but thou shalt remember the Lord thy God, for it is he that giveth thee power to get wealth.
And this warning, it transcends military conquest, just like you said. In the ancient world, wealth meant land, crops, livestock, security. In our modern context, it applies to every single thing we might credit ourselves with. Our successful career, our large portfolio, our superior health, or our intellectual capacity. It's that human temptation to say, I earned this.
The ultimate lesson here, which the You Need Faith in Jesus team uses to define this foundational section, is the necessity of a constant self-check. Every victory, whether it's spiritual, financial, or personal, must be recognized as a gift from God's strength.
And that recognition demands perpetual humility, a constant acknowledgement of grace. They have established a perfect historical precedent for divine action.
If the psalmist fails to acknowledge the source of the victory, he risks confusing the tool, the physical strength, the intellect, the investment strategy,
with the power, which is God's sovereign hand. At the outset, they are flawless historians of faith.
Which is the necessary springboard for the next section, isn't it? If they are so rock solid in their knowledge of past strength, how does that knowledge translate into a present personal commitment?
Exactly. The conversation shifts from what God did to who God is to me.
So now we move into this personal declaration and confidence in God.
Right. We transition from the collective historical memory to a deeply individual commitment. The remembrance of past power immediately fuels a personal declaration that sets the tone for their immediate expectations of deliverance.
The core assertion is the personal acknowledgement of kingship, a deeply covenantal statement in verse 4. The psalmist declares, Thou art my king, O God, command deliverances for Jacob. That's from Psalm 44, verse 4.
Thou art my king. This is such a crucial move. The psalmist is personalizing the historical account
Mm-hmm.
because God proved generations ago that he is the all-powerful sovereign who established the nation. The speaker today feels authorized, even obligated to ask him to exert that authority right now.
Okay, but I have to challenge this point. If they're in a time of great crisis, couldn't this just be traditional formal language? Isn't calling him king just a religious ritual? How do we know this is genuine, present faith rather than a platitude?
That's a necessary challenge, and we know it's a statement of genuine faith because of the imperative that follows. Command deliverances.
Ah.
This is not a hesitant plea, it's a demand based on perceived authority. A king commands, he doesn't merely suggest. The psalmist isn't asking God to try to help, but to speak a word that instantly changes reality.
So it speaks to total sovereignty, a declaration that God's authority is absolute.
The power lies in that word, command. It implies that God only needs to speak, and reality adjusts. This is active faith in the face of what they know is imminent suffering.
Wow.
And it connects directly back to the highest forms of covenantal prayer. We see the same personal acknowledgement of God's royal authority in David's own Psalms, turning the relationship into a personal vow. We can cross-reference Psalm 145, verse 1 here.
Oh, it says,
I will extol thee, my God, O King, and I will bless thy name forever and ever.
extolling him as king is acknowledging his supreme power and his right to rule over every area of life. The practical application here is simple. Recognizing God as our personal king, not just some historical figure, gives us the audacious confidence, regardless of circumstance, to bring our most desperate needs to the one who possesses the power to command instant intervention.
And that conviction, it just explodes immediately into this bold projection of future victory based entirely on God's power. The psalmist moves into what the sources call godly boasting and a complete renewed rejection of self-reliance in verses 5 through 8.
They're projecting God's past power onto their immediate and future conflicts, declaring that every success will be achieved through thee and through thy name.
Mm-hmm.
And they repeat the sentiment from the first section, explicitly rejecting military reliance again.
And that repetition is not accidental, it's a conscious theological choice. For I will not trust in my bow, neither shall my sword save me. This is a radical statement in a military society that lived or died by its steel.
Yeah, it is.
They are consciously choosing to stake their national security on the invisible power of God, actively negating the visible weapon in their hand.
Wait, if they established in section 1 that God secured the land, and they know he is their king from verse 4, why do they even need to repeat the rejection of the bow and sword? Isn't that a fundamental contradiction or, I don't know, a sign of lingering subconscious self-reliance?
I think it's the human heart revealing itself. It's easy to say God saved us as historically, but in the heat of a present conflict, the instinctual human response is to grab the visible security, the bow, the bank account, the career safety net.
Right.
The psalmist is engaged in a profound spiritual exercise, catching that self-reliant instinct and publicly rejecting it before the battle begins. We're actively choosing dependence.
That makes the declaration of boasting in the conclusion of this section all the more powerful. Let's read Psalm 44, verses 7 and 8 fully, as this is the ultimate expression of where their identity lies.
Yes.
But thou hast saved us from our enemies, and hast put them to shame that hated us. In God we boast all the day long and praise thy name forever. Selah.
The You Need Faith in Jesus team defines boasting in God beautifully. It means finding one's pride, confidence, and foundational identity only in who he is and what he has accomplished.
It's an act of spiritual and psychological humility.
And in a culture obsessed with self-promotion, what we might call social media boasting today, this is a radical countercultural move.
Let's expand on that psychological implication. When people boast, they're seeking validation, status, and security. If I boast in my professional title, my security is tied to my job. If I boast in my intellect, my security is tied to my mental sharpness. If the psalmist boasts in God, then their security is tied to God's eternal character. That shift is total.
Exactly. This stands in direct opposition to the natural human inclination to seek security in visible, tangible strengths. And we have the iconic cross-reference from Psalm 20 that reinforces this principle perfectly.
Psalm 20, verse 7. It embodies this contrast between human military might and divine reliance. The KJV reads, "Some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we will remember the name of the Lord our God."
Chariots and horses were the ultimate cutting-edge military technology, the tanks and fighter jets of the ancient world. They represented speed, strength, overwhelming force.
Yeah.
The psalmist isn't saying we don't use military tech. He's saying we reject these as our ultimate support. Our confidence, our boast is centered on the intangible, eternal name of the Lord.
The practical application here for you, the listener, is to conduct a kind of confidence inventory. The deep study from the You Need Faith in Jesus team challenges us.
Yeah,
Where does your true confidence lie?
right.
Do you lean on your investment portfolio, your professional network, or your comprehensive plans as your ultimate security? This section demands a conscious daily rejection of these as ultimate supports, insisting that we make God our boast.
So to summarize the first two sections, they possess a flawless historical foundation of faith God acts, and they have a perfect personal confession of faith. God is my king. I boast in him alone. They have built an airtight theological case for imminent victory.
A perfect case, which is why the transition to the next section, the moment where this perfect theology meets the contradictory reality, is perhaps the most visceral, painful pivot in the entire book of Songs.
After the confident declarations of verses 1 through 8, the anticipation is for a triumphant deliverance. Instead, the narrative just comes crashing down.
Signaled by a single devastating conjunction, but.
That word "but" is the sound of hope shattering. It introduces a sharp, agonizing contrast between the remembered, declared faith and the harsh, current, lived experience of defeat and perceived abandonment.
The crisis is immediate and shocking.
Let's read the verse that introduces this crisis, the moment the psalmist turns their accusation toward the seemingly absent king. This is Psalm 44, verse 9.
Yeah.
But thou hast cast off and put us to shame, and goest not forth with our armies.
The shock is amplified because the defeat is attributed directly to God. Thou hast cast off. This isn't just a military loss blamed on poor strategy. This is being discarded, thrown aside, by the very protector they had just declared their king.
To be cast off by God was the theological, political, and personal worst-case scenario for Israel. It instantly results in profound national shame.
And the tangible proof.
Goest not forth with our armies. In covenant theology, the presence of God on the battlefield guaranteed victory. If they were losing, the only logical conclusion for the ancient mind was that God had withdrawn his presence and protection.
The shame is acute because it implies not only military failure, but covenant failure, a theological disaster.
And that profound sense of absence and resulting public shame leads to a deeper fear. What will the surrounding nations say about their God?
This wrestling with divine reputation has a powerful historical parallel. I'm thinking of Joshua's reaction after the surprising defeat at Ai, which followed the incredible victory at Jericho.
Joshua was wrestling with the exact same question. If God's people are defeated, what does that communicate about God? We must quote Joshua chapter 7, verses 8 and 9, KJV, to understand the depth of their fear about their Lord's reputation.
Let's hear it.
O Lord, what shall I say when Israel turneth their backs before their enemies? And what wilt thou do unto thy great name?
Joshua's worry wasn't primarily about the casualties, it was about the theological consequences. When the covenant people fail, the nations blaspheme the name of God. The psalmist shares this profound burden.
Yeah, their personal shame is inseparable from what they perceive as God's shame in the eyes of the heathen.
This profound honesty, however, is one of the greatest gifts of Psalm 44. The You Need Faith in Jesus team analysis underscores that faith is not a denial mechanism. It is a theological license to be absolutely honest with the divine.
It's okay to bring our painful, confused reality to God when circumstances seem to violently contradict his established promises. It is the beginning of deeper trust, not the end of it.
And the situation only gets worse in the following verses, detailing the scope of the defeat, which moves from military loss to total devaluation.
The defeat is total, leading to what we call devaluation and total loss. The enemies spoil their possessions, the descriptive language is horrific, the people are utterly defenseless, scattered,
Described as being helpless, like sheep appointed for meat.
being led to inevitable slaughter, and then scattered in exile among foreign nations. Dispersion meant loss of identity, loss of home, loss of future.
But the most crushing, the most psychologically painful line, the ultimate expression of feeling discarded, is in verse 12, Psalm 44, verse 12.
Yeah.
Thou sellest thy people for naught, and dost not increase thy wealth by their price.
This is the agonizing cry of meaninglessness. Just analyze that phrase. God has sold them for nothing. It implies the total worthlessness of the transaction.
They weren't sold into slavery for profit or for any strategic advantage to God or the enemy. They were sold for naught, discarded.
The sheer misery of feeling worthless is what breaks the spirit here. To be sold for something, even a small price, would at least give their suffering a purpose, a reason for the pain.
But to be sold for naught implies complete and utter discard, as if their lives and suffering had zero value to the very protector who claimed them.
This accusation that God is treating them as worthless is an essential cry of the broken heart. And historically, God did sometimes turn rebellious Judah over to their enemies. We see the finality of this expressed in Jeremiah 15, verse 1.
What does it say?
God declares after intense national rebellion, "Though Moses and Samuel stood before me, yet my mind could not be toward this people. Cast them out of my sight and let them go forth."
Wow.
Now, while the psalmist in Psalm 44 is claiming integrity, the experience of being turned over to the enemy, the feeling of being cast out of sight, is universally devastating.
The comfort here, which the You Need Faith in Jesus team is keen to emphasize, is that this section provides theological vocabulary for deep loss. When you feel worthless, devalued, or that your suffering is utterly meaningless, these words give you a way to articulate that agony directly to God, knowing that He listens to the broken heart and can handle the painful accusation.
And the crisis then moves from military and economic loss to deep psychological and social devastation. This social humiliation in verses 13 through 16 is, for the ancient Israelite, arguably the deepest wound.
They become a complete public spectacle, a national laughingstock.
Mm-hmm.
The suffering is immense social humiliation. They are a reproach, a scorn, and a derision among neighbors, living with daily confusion and shame.
Psalm 44, verse 13, lays bare this exposure. "Thou makest us a reproach to our neighbors, a scorn and a derision to them that are round about us." They are living proof for their enemies that the God of Israel is either non-existent, weak, or utterly faithless to his own people.
Verse 14 makes them a byword among the heathen. Let's talk about that term, byword. It's more than just a passing insult.
It's much more. It means they have become a cautionary tale, a punchline used in other nations' cultural conversation to signify complete and utter failure.
The term byword indicates that their national tragedy has been co-opted into the popular blasphemous culture of their neighbors. Their faith, once a badge of honor, now causes the enemies to wag their head and deride them.
And because the enemies know who Israel worships, the taunts are directed not just at the nation, but they are explicit blasphemies against the king who has just declared their only hope.
This psychological burden, the shame that covers their face, the confusion that consumes them, is almost unbearable. We can draw a specific parallel to the public shaming described in Lamentations after Jerusalem fell.
The destruction of the city was a profound social and psychological dismantling. Lamentations 2, verses 15 and 16, KJV, capture this universal public contempt, which aligns perfectly with the psalmist's complaint of derision. It says, "All that pass by clap their hands at thee. They hiss and wag their head at the daughter of Jerusalem, saying, Is this the city that men call the perfection of beauty, the joy of the whole earth?"
That clap their hands and wag their head are ancient, powerful gestures of mockery and derision. Imagine living in a state of continuous, exposed failure. The psalmist is admitting to total psychological and social defeat.
The practical application for you as a listener here is deeply comforting. When you face public failure, professional ruin, or scorn for your commitment to faith, which happens often, these verses affirm that God fully understands the pain of public humiliation and invites you to pour out that feeling before him.
The crisis of the present is raw, honest, and total.
Which leads us to the critical theological turning point. The psalmist has established the depth of the suffering, but now he has to address the cause. If they are suffering this badly, conventional wisdom says they must have sinned terribly.
And this brings us to the profound dilemma of the righteous sufferer.
This section represents the central theological conflict of the entire psalm. The expectation is that this total suffering is direct divine punishment. But the psalmist insists, and this is a very daring move, that the suffering is not a result of national sin.
This is the radical claim of covenant integrity.
It is a moment of profound courage. They have to maintain their faithfulness even while God seems to be destroying them. They insist, "We have not forgotten thee, and we have not dealt falsely in thy covenant."
We have to look closely at Psalm 44,
Yeah.
verses 17 and 18, which contain this explicit declaration of blamelessness.
Yeah.
All this has come upon us. Yet have we not forgotten thee, neither have we dealt falsely in thy covenant. Our heart is not turned back, neither have our steps declined from thy way.
They are essentially standing before the divine court and pleading not guilty.
Right.
They assert their adherence to the covenant law. Their hearts have not turned to idolatry, which was the cardinal sin, and their steps have not strayed from the physical path of obedience. They are claiming that their internal and external lives are aligned with God's commands.
Yet despite this integrity, they find themselves in utterly terrifying places. They are sore broken us in the place of dragons, a reference to desolate, dangerous wilderness places and covered by the shadow of death.
So this is suffering that just doesn't fit the expected theological formula. Righteousness should equal blessing. Sin should equal curse. The equation is unbalanced.
The psalmist is forcing the theological question. If we are obedient, why are we experiencing the curses reserved for the disobedient? This is unearned suffering, demanding a comparison to the ultimate righteous sufferer in the Old Testament canon.
Indeed, the comparison to Job is unavoidable. The psalmist's stand echoes Job's declaration of integrity amidst his profound, unearned suffering, emphasizing that even when tested to the extreme, the spiritual foundation holds.
Right.
We have to quote Job 23, verses 10 through 12, KJV, which speaks to holding fast to the divine path.
Okay.
But he knoweth the way that I take. When he hath tried me, I shall come forth as gold. My foot hath held his steps, his way have I kept and not declined. Neither have I gone back from the commandment of his lips.
That is a crucial insight. Job's confidence, like the psalmist's, is that the suffering is a trial, not a sentence. The "you need faith in Jesus" team analysis highlights the foundational lesson here. We must reject the simplistic theology that all hardship is a direct punishment for sin. God's faithful people sometimes endure profound hardship without a clear, immediate explanation, and the call is to cling to faith in the face of those unanswered questions.
It is the highest level of faith, to stand in integrity when the world and your own circumstances argue against it. And the psalmist takes this bold claim even further, challenging God to inspect their hearts for any hidden subconscious sin.
They challenge God, confident that he would know if there were any hidden idolatry, as he knoweth the secrets of the heart. But then comes a staggering, world-changing realization that flips the entire narrative of their suffering.
Yes.
It's the moment they realize their suffering is not random, but because of their faithfulness.
This is the critical redemptive shift in the entire psalm. They move from the agonized question, why are we suffering despite our faithfulness, to the triumphant, albeit painful realization, we are suffering because of our faithfulness.
Let's read Psalm 24, verses 21 and 22 KJV.
Shall not God search this out? For he knoweth the secrets of the heart. Yea, for thy sake are we killed all the day long. We are accounted as sheep for the slaughter.
For thy sake. The suffering is transformed instantly. It is no longer meaningless discard that's sold for naught, but meaningful identification. They are being persecuted, killed, and disgraced because of their exclusive loyalty to God in a hostile, idolatrous world. They are sheep appointed for slaughter, just as they mentioned in verse 11. But now they know the reason. It is the consequence of choosing allegiance to their king.
This profound realization transforms suffering from a sign of divine abandonment into a badge of honor. It is the cost of discipleship. And this is precisely why the Apostle Paul, recognizing the timeless and universal nature of this truth, applied this exact verse to Christian suffering centuries later.
This link is stunning. Paul uses this passage, originally a national lament, to articulate the universal reality of persecution for all followers of Christ. Let's quote Paul's profound application in Romans 8, verse 36.
Yes, let's.
As it is written, for thy sake we are killed all the day long, we are accounted as sheep for the slaughter.
Paul explicitly uses the psalmist's cry of martyrdom being accounted as sheep for the slaughter, not to conclude despair, but as the precursor to the most triumphant statement in the New Testament.
Wow.
He immediately follows this by asking, who shall separate us from the love of Christ? He uses the hardship as proof of the unshakable nature of God's love.
That is the ultimate hope derived from the deep study provided by the You Need Faith in Jesus team. Suffering for faith is an identification with Christ, not a sign of divine displeasure. The suffering flips the whole narrative.
It does.
The pain is not punishment for treason. It is the inevitable consequence of loyalty. The ultimate hope lies in the unshakable love of God that holds the believer through the trouble.
Having established their integrity and defined the meaningful cause of their pain, the psalmist is now positioned to make their final appeal. They aren't asking for justice because they were good. They are asking for intervention from a place of meaningful but absolute helplessness.
The journey has been torturous. Historical certainty, present despair, vindicated integrity. The song culminates now in the most raw, daring, and frankly offensive cry in Scripture. The deliverance is still absent, and the psalmist cries out for God to act.
This is the language of human desperation pushing against theological propriety. It is a poetic plea for immediate intervention when God seems silent, distant, and inactive. They cry out for God to awake.
Psalm 44, verses 23 and 24 are a masterpiece of raw emotion. Awake, why sleepest thou, O Lord? Arise, cast us not off forever. Wherefore hidest thou thy face, and forgettest our affliction and our oppression?
We have to immediately acknowledge the theological paradox. We know from Psalm 121 that God neither slumbers nor sleeps. Yet the human heart, confronted with overwhelming pain and silence, needs to scream at the perceived inactivity of the divine. Why sleepest thou is a poetic indictment of God's apparent apathy.
And wherefore hidest thou thy face signifies the ultimate withdrawal of God's favorable attention, a feeling of being completely ignored and forgotten in their greatest moment of crisis.
And that feeling of being forgotten after declaring their loyalty is a crisis of faith.
Yeah.
This intensity of emotion is mirrored perfectly in the New Testament. The disciples, during the massive storm on the Sea of Galilee, confront the sleeping Jesus with a mixture of fear, faith, and accusation, demanding action from the one they knew had the power to command.
They question his concern directly, which is exactly the heart of the matter.
Hmm?
Mark 4, verse 38 captures that demanding panic. Master, carest thou not that we perish?
The question, carest thou not, mirrors the psalmist's forgettest our affliction. The practical application here, emphasized by the You Need Faith in Jesus team study, is absolutely critical for the listener. Faith allows for wrestling. God is large enough to handle our why when he seems distant. You are permitted, even encouraged, to cry out to God with raw emotion and question his apparent silence.
But even in that honesty, they have to transition from demanding action based on their own integrity, from section 4 to appealing purely to God's character.
Yes, the final verses present the imagery of total helplessness and the ultimate foundational plea.
They confess total physical and spiritual defeat. The imagery is of complete surrender. Soul is bowed down to the dust, and the belly cleaveth unto the earth.
That phrase means they are prostrate, lying flat on the ground, unable to rise, defeated in every sense.
They recognize they have reached the limits of their own resources, their strength, and even their claimed righteousness. They have one final, non-meritorious appeal left.
Which brings us to the ultimate redemptive point of the entire psalm, captured in the final, most crucial verse. Psalm 44, verse 26, KJV.
Okay.
Arise for our help and redeem us for thy mercy's sake.
The crucial, defining final shift. Their appeal is not based on their own claimed integrity from the previous section, we didn't sin. It's based entirely on God's inherent, unchanging character, for thy mercy's sake.
They cast themselves completely on God's steadfast love and grace.
This is the ultimate act of surrender and trust. It means that when all human attempts at proving worthiness fail, when their historical memory is perfect, their personal declaration is flawless, and their integrity is claimed, yet they are still prostrate in the dust, the only ground for standing before God is his grace alone.
They are asking God to act, not because they are good, but because he is merciful and covenantally faithful.
And this shift aligns perfectly with other great supplications in Scripture. I'm thinking of Daniel interceding for a nation under massive judgment. He never appealed based on human worthiness or a claim of contemporary obedience.
He appealed exclusively to God's nature. We quote Daniel 9, verse 18, which is the perfect parallel to Psalm 44.26.
For we do not present our supplications before thee for our righteousnesses, but for thy great mercies.
That is the final profound lesson, distilled by the You Need Faith in Jesus team study. The ultimate destination of faith and suffering is this: when all personal strength fails, when integrity seems insufficient, and when circumstances mock your theology, deliverance rests solely on the foundation of God's sovereign grace and character.
The past remembrance gives them the hope that the King can act.
And the present suffering forces them to appeal only to the fact that the King is merciful.
And that profound journey, from historical confidence to agonizing honesty, ending in total reliance on divine mercy, completes the powerful, dramatic arc of Psalm 44.
It is a necessary scriptural roadmap for the faithful soul navigating contradictory reality.
This discussion showed us the profound architecture of faith. A powerful, reliable memory of past action gives way to an agonizing, unavoidable honesty about the present, which finds its only solid ground in the eternal nature of God, his mercy. It's the essential guide for navigating those moments where your lived experience seems to violently argue against what you know to be true about the divine.
And this challenging text translates directly into clear, actionable steps for you, the listener, drawing directly from the key theological pivots we discussed as structured by the You Need Faith in Jesus team's practical analysis.
First, be a historian. Regularly remember and actively share God's historical and personal works. This keeps the foundation of faith solid, ensuring it isn't based solely on your mood or circumstance today. The instruction from Exodus 12, verses 26 and 27, demands that we pass on the story of God's deliverance, ensuring the faith remains rooted in historical fact.
Second, be honest. Feel free to wrestle and cry out with your genuine pain and confusion. Don't sanitize your despair. Psalm 44, verses 23 and 24 gives you the vocabulary of desperation. Awake, why sleepest thou, O Lord? God can handle your rawest emotion and your most agonizing questions.
Third, be humble. Reject all forms of self-reliance and consciously boast only in God. When the pressure is on, the instinct is to grab the nearest visible strength: our career, our money, our intellect. The lesson from Psalm 20, verse 7, is to consistently and proactively reject the chariots and horses and remember only the name of the Lord our God.
And then finally, fourth, be merciful-minded. Base your petitions for help entirely on God's mercy, never on your perceived worthiness or merit. This is the ultimate submission found in Daniel 9, verse 18. When you petition God for deliverance, do so not for your righteousnesses, but for his great mercies. This shifts the focus entirely from human failure and lack to God's boundless capacity and goodness.
We deeply appreciate the clarity, the structural rigor, and the theological insight provided by the You Need Faith in Jesus team in navigating this complex and raw scripture. It transforms a painful lament into an enduring foundation for resilient faith.
The journey through Psalm 44 is not easy, but it is essential. It gives theological weight and meaning to the suffering of the faithful.
Here's where it gets really interesting. If suffering for Christ is at times an active identification with him, as Paul argues using this very psalm in Romans 8.36, how does knowing your present pain might be for his sake change the way you ultimately pray for deliverance? Does understanding that your struggle has a divine, meaningful purpose lead you to deepen the urgency of your cry to be rescued, or does it instead deepen your resolve to endure for the sake of the King? Consider that profound tension as you reflect on this text.